Welcome to In Your Neighborhood. I'm your host, Chris O'Rourke. And this episode is all about one thing, entertainment. We're going to start off with an orchestra that's based in Lewisburg and not only puts on shows each year here at the campus, but around the world as well. The Paragon Ragtime Orchestra set out 30 years ago to keep a genre of American music alive.
The Paragon Ragtime Orchestra backs up one of cinema's greatest, Charlie Chaplin, at the campus theater back in May. It was the orchestra's first time back at the campus since 2014, and it was enough to pull in a big crowd, selling out the place. The Paragon and its members didn't disappoint, entertaining the crowd not only with its accompaniment of Chaplin's Easy Street, but with the very amusing Get Out and Get Under from 1920, which was directed by one of the biggest names in movies back then, Hal Roach. The orchestra first played here in 2001.
And that was facilitated by Eric Faden, who was the film professor at Bucknell, and still is, and for a while owned the campus theater. And he had this really brilliant idea. In fact, he had a student bring him one of our videos of Chaplin films, suggesting that we do something at the campus. And Eric said, well, how are we going to get these guys out here? And the student said, you don't have to, they're down the street.
Lewisburg and the campus are, in fact, the home bases of the orchestra, in large part because Benjamin lives on North 4th Street, just a stroll away from the theater. It's a nice break from having to travel by car or plane to perform, and the evening at the campus was part of a planned tour of Pennsylvania. This performance also brought the number of times the orchestra has played in synchronization to a silent film to 661. It's the result of an agreement Benjamin made back in 1992.
I was sitting in my office, which is through that door over there, and the phone rang. And it was the chief of the music division of the Washington, D.C. Public Library. How's that for a title? And he said, Rick, we have a lot of your recordings here, and we understand what you're doing. We've been down in the basement. I love calls like this. We're down in the basement, and we're moving into a new building. So we're getting out of this place, and we found down there 26 crates of silent film scores for orchestra. Belonged to the old Capitol Theater here. The theater closed years ago. They wheeled this stuff in 1942, and we haven't even opened this stuff. Would you folks be interested in taking a donation? And I said, how soon? I can be there in a few hours if you'd like. And I think it might have been the next day. I went across the highway here, got a U-Haul truck, and went to Washington. And indeed, here was sort of the King Tut's tomb of American cinema music. Scores going back to 1912 and through the late 20s when sound came in, sound on film. And the only condition the library had was that whoever would take this donation would have to design and present public programs. So that was easily done. We agreed to that, moved the collection up here. And since '92, about 50% of our public performances are for films.
Yep, you heard right, 26 crates. In fact, Benjamin's collection of music from the early days of the American record business, roughly the 1880s to the early 1900s, now numbers close to 20,000 pieces, several tons of materials, scattered around various safe storage areas. The stuff that's used on a weekly basis can be found in Benjamin's office. He also recently added even more music following a trip to Boston. It's the personal collection of historic orchestra music of Pulitzer Prize winner Gunther Schuller, who decided that Benjamin would be the best future caretaker for it. He has become the standard bearer of sorts for this type of music, receiving calls about collections that usually results in him hopping in his car. He also admits to doing his share of dumpster diving, which is how he first began collecting. It was back when he was at the Juilliard School of Music for his tuba playing. His interest in this period led him to an assistant of Arthur Pryor, who was one of the first conductors for recording sessions in the early 1900s. The assistant told Benjamin that the actual scores used by the Victor Talking Machine Company still existed.
And that was pretty exciting news for me anyway. So I went to this location, this old building, and here was this dilapidated place, and out a window is this giant plywood chute leading into a dumpster. and guys were upstairs just tossing armloads of paper into this thing, down the chute, into the dumpster. So that was kind of interesting. I climbed up. It's not the first time since then I've dove into a dumpster, by the way. And here's all this music, musical scores, these things sitting here. And I pulled out a violin part, said The Peacherine Rag by Scott Joplin in manuscript. So I've found my way around the chain link to this project and in this building, and there was a pretty good sized room full of musical scores, sheet music stacked up. And these guys were perfectly happy to let me take armloads down the stairs. They disappeared somewhere, the perpetual break. And I managed to load up my car, and I did this quite a few times, loaded up the car until some foreman or other said, "Who is this kid and why is he in here?"
Right.
But I managed to get about 4,000 musical compositions out of this building before they did end up junking a lot of stuff. But I had this huge stack of material, about 700 composers, and I'd stashed it in the basement of my parents' house. They were fortunately on vacation, so they didn't see this giant, 4-foot-high pile of stuff taking up their basement. Started bringing it back to Juilliard, armload at a time, and I put together an orchestra of my friends that we called Paragon. And we were rehearsing, and we started it as something that was going to be sort of a relaxation from playing Brahms or Mozart all day, something kind of wacky and just messing around. But within a few minutes of our very first rehearsal, we realized, playing these arrangements, that here was something that was important. Here was something of quality, something deeply American that really had been completely forgotten. Music from the late 19th century and early 1900s.
He called the group the Paragon Ragtime Orchestra to give people a sense of the time period. They're celebrating their 30th anniversary this year, and all told, they performed about 1,500 times. What began back in 1986 with their first concert at Juilliard soon led to record deals, invites to perform and talk about the music at colleges and universities, the agreement with the public library, and stops at 49 states and 7 countries.
We love the campus, but in terms of maybe venues that have a more widely known, the Ravinia Festival in Chicago is fabulous. We did motion pictures there for 5,000 people, and if you've ever heard a crowd laugh together of 5,000, it's pretty thrilling. Chautauqua, of course, is always nice, New York State. We've played a couple times in Hollywood for things, at Grauman's on Hollywood Boulevard, and that's pretty neat, to go out there and see all the stuff and then go inside and play.
They've been helped along the way by the collected and donated music, word of mouth, and favorable reviews, like the one they received in the New York Times following their New York debut in 1988. Depending on the season and the economy, the Paragon Ragtime Orchestra may perform 50 concerts, with their best year of 67 in 2001. But it has taken the arts a while to recover from the recession, and the group is currently playing right around 20 times. The one place that you can hear them play all of the time is pretty magical. That's right, the Magic Kingdom and other Disney venues. The orchestra's music guides you down Main Street towards Cinderella's castle. One of the VPs for the company's Imagineer contingent was looking for something authentic when they were building Disneyland Paris back in 1989, and being familiar with the orchestra, he called to license some of their stuff. That same person then went on to refurbish Disney World and Disneyland and decided to use the same music. Disney tells Benjamin that 600 million people have walked Main Street since they started playing their music, and Rick was one of them.
It is neat. One time I went with my kids and they were blasting again. I think it's a little too loud sometimes too, one of our pieces. And I went up to a sidewalk vendor with my son was maybe 8 or 9 and I was going to show off a little. And I said to this vendor, "How do you like this music?" And the guy turned around, he said, "I hate it." So that wasn't a good thing. And I guess if you have to keep hearing the same 20 things every day for all year round, it would get a little bit grating. But then one of the magical thing one time was standing on that big balcony at the exit to the park where the train station is. And they were playing one of our slow pieces. It's a thing from 1918 called Smiles by Lee S. Roberts. Beautiful lyrical piece, but it's rhythmic. The entire flow of visitors of Disney World were walking out of the parks after fireworks with this thing playing, and they were all moving in time to our music. And the Japanese tourists holding hands, and the old couple and little kids running with their cotton candy. And that was pretty darn neat, I gotta tell you.
Regrettably, Benjamin and his crew were young at the time and, as he says, not particularly smart, and signed a less than ideal deal. So he has settled for a certain quiet satisfaction in knowing the parks have the real deal. The orchestra's music has also been featured on the television show American Horror Story, and they put out a remake of the Marca Zorro with their music underneath. Paragon has released 17 albums, with the latest being The Pioneers of Movie Music. It profiles 17 composers with an extensive pullout with bios. The orchestra's success over the years has allowed Benjamin something he never would have imagined: a full-time job at the helm of his creation. Work that he does out of his office, surrounded by filing cabinets full of 5,000 complete music works that he's more than happy to perform. On the walls are collectibles, old posters, and a whiteboard with a concert to-do list, including one for Berlin. So you may be asking yourself, how did Lewisburg become the hub for this globe-trotting musical operation?
Oh, that was just kind of another whim. I've always loved, and my wife, Leslie Cullen, really loved Victorian architecture. It's just a neat thing. We read books about architects and love the style. And as two 20-somethings living in and around New York, we had always talked about buying a Victorian house to restore. And finally that happened in '92. We were on tour. We played at the Weiss Center in good old Lewisburg, PA. You might have heard of it. We ended up buying this house, actually, within a few days. It was kind of a wacky thing. First-time home buyers, I think I was 25 years old. And so here we are, and we quietly started to restore this building. This is the John Stannard House, a Civil War veteran and guardian of Abraham Lincoln, too, a distinguished local citizen. When kids came along, the restoration sort of stopped. So there's quite a bit of the building that isn't done yet. But between concerts and other kinds of things, we will get back to that. But the atmosphere here is what it's all about.
Some of the 35 musicians who are affiliated with the orchestra are close by, with the rest scattered around, including in New York City, where one plays for the Philharmonic and others on Broadway. You also may be surprised to hear that this woman, Carolyn Shaw, once performed as the orchestra's second violin, including at the Campus Theater in Central Oak Heights near Milton. She was awarded the Pulitzer Prize for Music in 2013 and was a member of the Grammy-winning vocal group Roomful of Teeth. Benjamin comes from a musical family and says it was essentially required that he begin taking piano lessons at the age of 7. When he reached high school, the band director suggested the tuba because of what he calls his heft. He will occasionally play piano solos, or if a piece requires it, conduct and play at the same time. He says he looks much like a crazed pirate with his baton in his mouth at the keyboards. He took conducting classes at Juilliard, but says his work as a tuba player also helped.
And interestingly, a great way to become a conductor is to be a tuba player in a symphony orchestra. And I'll tell you why. Because you have to sit there and you don't get to play very much. And for 20 minutes, the violas and violins are going, and you're just sitting back there like this, waiting for the big chord. Yeah, they pick up the tuba and go, bomb, and then, and you sit there. So what I would do would bring a conductor score to the rehearsal. And I would sit there, and we're at school, and there's Leonard Bernstein as the guest conductor today at the school. So I've got the score, it's Brahms Symphony or Mahler. Wow, that was interesting, the way he did this thing there. Wow, you hear the way the orchestra responded to that? Wow, okay. write this down. So you can learn a lot if you're in a rehearsal, and of course the school would bring in these great people. Oh, sure. He yelled at me, in fact. He said I was not loud enough. And I was playing so loudly that the viola section literally were sliding their chairs forward to get away from me. I mean, it was unbelievably loud. It was a Mahler 7, I think. Very loud, raucous, weird piece.
Rick Benjamin tells us that besides the work on his house,